Welcome back to Dungeon Brew. Today, Josh and I are going to be continuing our series on narrative design, and today we're going to be discussing vignettes and writing and TTRPGs. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
All right, welcome back. Today we are going to talk about vignettes, which is often an overlooked aspect of writing, whether in books or in gameplay, but it can honestly change the entire narrative of either of those. But let's start. Josh, what is a vignette?
So, a vignette in its most basic form is like a short piece of writing that's adding a little bit of flavor to your story. They don't necessarily have like a beginning, a middle, and an end. They're rather focusing on like a specific moment in time and really like highlighting the details within that moment and just drawing you right in.
Yeah, that's right. There's no plot with them. They're just a part of the bigger picture to keep you in the story. They are really good at kind of revealing, I mean, depending on how you're going to use it, but revealing, a character's intentions or the mood of a situation. They give you different impressions or, they kind of set the theme of, what it is that's going on to kind of suck you in more.
Yeah, I think you and I talked about it in describing it this way before we went live and thinking of it like a cut scene. It's almost like breaking
Mhm.
away from the regular plot, the regular story of whatever's happening to just draw the attention to something that's of interest. And it may play a part in the bigger story, but it doesn't have to. It can just be this immersion filled experience where you're just like describing the smell of blood or the sound of a tavern or something else that's going on within the environment that just makes you feel like you're really there.
Yeah, I think that's the most important part when it comes to actually writing. And oftentimes, I'm going to admit, maybe I sound a little judgy, but if somebody sends me their writing and they're like, "Hey, could you take a look at this thing that I've written?" If
Mm-hmm.
there isn't some kind of vignette or some kind of that description that really sucks you into the story and gives you that feeling of being there, then I'm like, like hold on. And that's where I'm kind of like, okay, how much advice do I give to the person? Do I make a point of this or do I just leave it alone? Is it, I guess this is a good question. Would you consider vignettes to be something that, does it have to do with the voice of a writer or the person who's creating? Like, do you think that vignettes just need to be part of a book, or do you think that it would be depending on the voice of the person who's writing the story or the gameplay?
I know that there's
That makes
many,
sense.
yeah, it does. There's a lot of games that don't have vignettes in them. And I think the style of those games and the way they're put together doesn't necessitate them. There's also, I think, ways that you can write certain books that don't necessarily need them either to the same degree.
Mhm.
But vignettes, for the most part, like they really, I think, pull at your emotional connection. They give a really strong impression to like moments and characters and objects, and they allow you to have this, again, that emotional attachment to whatever's going on to solidify you in that. Like when I write D&D vignettes, when I'm talking about my characters coming into a tavern, I'm focusing on those five senses. They step into the tavern, and I want to just bring that tavern to life. So they can smell the roasted duck that's coming out of the kitchen. They can smell the cigar smoke and the alcohol and the other patrons' clothes. They can hear the clattering of dishes and the barkeep yelling over the counter at a drunk that's getting too unruly, and the bard who's on the stage who's strumming away trying to sing his song or tell his tale louder than everyone else, get a few more silver to play his thing. And just in hearing that, you're immediately kind of swept in. You're like, I can feel like I'm here, and I'm now I know how to engage in the scene around me. And then you go back to your characters within that doorway so they kind of know all the different options of where they can move. And without having that as part of your narrative, it's like you don't know where to go. You're kind of being dragged along then
Mhm.
without really having, I think, choice on where you want to, I don't know, look into. That's my thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I that reminds me when I first started talking to publishers many, many, many years ago. One of the comments from the publisher was that I needed to be a little more descriptive about the emotional
Mm-hmm.
part of things, to kind of get into it. And the way that she had said it was like your character is like a house plant that's being dragged around throughout the story
Yeah.
instead of the reader being able to really, feel it. And that was kind of like what turned that switch in my mind. And I was like, okay, that's what I need to that was what I needed to hear to kind of switch perspective, which I think is what vignettes really do, is they give you the right perspective, or the perspective that the writer wants the reader or the gamer to be in during that story. But I definitely think it's something that I naturally lean to, and something that I
Mm-hmm.
look for specifically in books as well. But I'm curious, like with TTRPGs, are there any rules to where you put vignettes, or is that just kind of open to the GM?
Well, I first have to say that I love the analogy of the houseplant being dragged around, because I think that's the last thing you want, especially in a game that's supposed to bring everyone together, telling a story together. But
Oh yeah.
I do think that there are probably some basic rules around where you want to have vignettes, where you want to have them inserted in, like your descriptive pieces. You see this frequently in like adventures or campaigns that are already put together prior, where it talks about the background behind certain characters and their stories, their motivations,
Mhm.
in running a kingdom, or running, their sawmill down the road. When you're walking through dungeons, there's little tiny little blocks of text that kind of describe each room as you're moving through. And some of them really give a lot of flavor to what the monsters are, what the room looks like, what the chest is across the way that's about ready to turn into a mimic. And you also see this, I think, pretty often in terms of just like your monster manuals. Every monster manual has a little description
Mhm.
about that monster and what they look like as they're lumbering towards you, with their claws and their teeth and their skin color and all that type of thing is all there. Now, I rarely see GMs regularly kind of fall into that and use that descriptive, but even just pulling those out of a monster manual and reading them, again, brings your game to life. So yeah,
Yeah.
yes, I think that there are certain times it's expected. As you step into a room, as you step into a new environment, as you find a new, maybe a new letter that's on the ground, or a journal entry, or some sort of inscription on a statue, you want to really kind of lift that up. But at the same time, you probably don't want to go into a 3-minute monologue that's very purple prosy, just talking about all these great things, because your characters will kind of lose sense of what's happening.
But isn't that what Tolkien did?
Well, Tolkien, I don't think played Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, yes, no, touche. Before we go on, I want to remind the viewers, if you are enjoying the content here today, please like, subscribe, and click that little bell so you can be notified of our future videos. I wanted to go back into the, I guess, where you kind of place vignettes. I mean, that I'm trying to, I guess, make comparisons between monster manuals and where you put them in books, because monster manuals are, a separate entity from
Mhm.
the story, but it's still within the world, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that kind of makes me think of where I generally work in vignettes is sort of like where I'll be telling the story, and then it's sort of like the end of a scene, and then there's like an extra little space there, so it's not a whole new
Hmm.
chapter, it's just this little chunk of writing that kind of gives you that outline, or sets that theme for that next waking morning or something, if everybody's going to sleep,
Yeah.
or just kind of refocuses on, okay, what are the intentions, what is going on here right now, what are the expectations to be had within the next scene that's going to come in. But I think that's I'm just trying to, I think, offer viewers a different kind of perspective, of a different way to see vignettes as well.
Yeah, I think you're really capturing something here. Vignettes are typically used when you're introducing something novel. So if it's a new monster, a new room, a new experience, you're going to describe that. Every time you come and you cross an orc in the forest, I'm not going to give the description of that orc every single time. That's going to get old. But the first time you come across it, or the first time you come across a novel monster, I'm going to give that really descriptive piece to really bring it to life. And then you
Mm-hmm.
know that's attached to it each time. But what you're talking about is also reinforcing some story elements that you've already kind of put together to realign what's
Yeah.
happening. So you may add intentions or motivations behind that. The orc who
Mm-hmm.
is working for, the General Red has stepped out of the forest and raises his axe, and you know that he's allied with this BBEG and he's coming after you, and you use that in your
Mm-hmm.
vignette to make that connection to reinforce the other story elements that you've been talking about.
Yeah, so there's not necessarily one single kind of vignette. There's different, methods or different reasons to be using them.
Mm-hmm. I like to think about it as a cinematic, really. I mean, we've played enough video games and,
Mm-hmm.
and even probably watched enough movies that we've seen these come into play, where it's almost like just a breakaway seen in a while, where you're just kind of putting the full game on pause and you're just giving this impressionistic, poetic prose to like the visuals of what's happening around you. And writing them can really be a lot of fun. I probably spend more time writing these than other GMs, just because I like giving that description. I like trying to find, like, how do I tie into all the five senses to just really make my players feel like they are there, that they're feeling it and hearing it and even tasting it in many instances.
Yeah, I think vignettes were sort of like hyper focused on I mean, I kind of realized, wait a second, like I could do this more with my writing back in the day when Battle of Azeroth was coming out,
Mm-hmm.
and they were always releasing these new, cinematics
Mm-hmm.
that weren't exactly, poetic or anything, really like meaningful in that sense of emotion, but it was like suddenly getting like really excited about what was going to happen next. It's, this big battle scene that's
Mm-hmm.
happening and showing kind of the relationship of, the bad guy and the good guy, and, the different, creatures that are running around. And, you get to see their emotions, to see kind of who is working just through rage versus who is functioning through this emotional, desire to protect the people. But I think that was kind of like, wait a second, I could do this in my books too. Like I've been kind of doing this, but I could be a little more
Mm-hmm.
intense with it. That was, I think, when I saw it go from something more of that poetic to that more intensive, like action packed kind of vignette.
Yeah, and I think that's like the next step of vignette writing. Like, you can first start off just like write descriptive pieces that bring them into it, but when you start interweaving like story elements into them as well, so you have NPCs traveling with you and you're getting a sense of their motivations based on their facial expressions and their body language and what's happening, and you're able to give that descriptive piece, it allows the characters to have like a whole nother layer to their storytelling. It's like, oh my, there's something else going on here with this companion I have that I didn't know about before, that's now been brought to my attention because of this little vignette that the GM has worked its way in. So I think it's a lot of fun to do, and you can do it in so many
Oh yeah.
things. Like I said, and it doesn't have to have meaning like that. It really doesn't. John wrote a great manual for dwarven ales that we have available,
Oh yeah.
and every single ale, I don't even know. There's dozens of ales in there, and every one has a descriptive piece of what it tastes like, how thick it is, what it smells like, and so as you do the description, like, you can taste it yourself. And just having small things like that within your story are amazing. I bring my characters into taverns all the time, and I have full lengthy menus of all these crazy things that they serve, including the ales that John has put together. And just letting them eat their soup and talking about how it's so salty that, they have to reach for a drink. Otherwise, it's hard for them to talk because their tongue is swelling. Again, immediately makes you feel like you're there. So it doesn't have
I
to
love
be,
that.
yeah, like I say, it doesn't have to be super meaningful. You can use it in a number of different ways.
Yeah, I got to look at that. Although I think my fear is diving too much into the
Mm-hmm.
descriptive parts of something like that, so much that it takes away from like the point of the scene, which I think is just what you have to watch out for and make sure that you're not doing.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think the primary purpose of it is to enhance symbolism that you already have going on within your story. It's to enhance themes that you already have going on. But in its most basic form, writing a vignette is just really bringing to life a small little section of your story that may or may not have something to do with the larger part of the story.
That's right.
All right, so I think that's all we have for you guys today on vignettes. Hopefully, this has been helpful and a different way of looking about how to write this content. As Diana said, if you guys like what you see, please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, and we will see you guys next time.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.